Some disappearances leave behind questions. Others leave behind nothing at all. No struggle, no witnesses, no final goodbye. Just a quiet space where a person once stood. What authorities would later uncover deep within a forgotten wilderness was not an accident, not a crime of impulse, but something carefully constructed, something patient, something ritualistic. But none of that was known on the morning Elena Ward left home. Before we continue, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Take a moment to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. You're part of this community, and we'd love to hear from you. The story begins October 3rd, 1992, Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina. The morning air was cool enough to raise goosebumps, but not cold. Autumn had arrived gently in the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the hills in muted golds and reds. It was the kind of morning that invited you outside, one that promised clarity, peace, and routine. Elena Ward noticed none of it. She was too busy checking her equipment for the third time. At 22 years old, Elena was a graduate student at Appalachian State University, specializing in environmental biology. Her research focused on native moss species and soil, preservation in high-altitude forests. Hiking wasn't recreation for her. It was work, discipline, and sanctuary. She had grown up in these mountains. The trails were as familiar to her as the layout of her childhood home. That morning, she planned a short solo hike along the Cragmore Loop Trail, a moderately trafficked route inside Pisgah National Forest. The plan was simple: document moss growth near an old rock overhang, collect soil samples, and return by late afternoon. Before leaving, Elena ate breakfast with her parents, Thomas and Lynn Ward, in their Boone townhouse. They talked about nothing important: classes, whether the fall colors were peaking early. At 6:45 a.m., Elena slung her jacket over her arm. "I'll be back before dark," she said casually. "Dinner's on me." Her mother smiled. Her father nodded. Neither of them realized that was the last time they would ever hear her voice. Elena drove a faded blue 1990 Subaru Legacy, its bumper held together with zip ties and stubbornness. The forest road leading to the trailhead was narrow and winding, flanked by towering hardwoods and dense undergrowth. According to Forest Service records, her vehicle passed the ranger checkpoint at 8:12 a.m. Weather conditions were ideal. Clear skies, temperature hovering around 13 degrees. No storm warnings, no reason for concern. At 8:26 a.m., Elena made a brief phone call to her father. "I'm here," she said. "Parking now. I'll text when I'm heading back." The call lasted 43 seconds. Her phone would never transmit another signal. By sunset, Elena hadn't returned. By 8:01 p.m., her parents' concern had hardened into fear. Calls went unanswered. Text messages showed as undelivered. At 9:10 p.m., Thomas Ward contacted the Pisgah Ranger District, reporting his daughter missing. A ranger was dispatched immediately. At 10:04 p.m., Elena's Subaru was found exactly where she had left it, parked neatly at the Cragmore Loop trailhead. The car was locked. Inside, illuminated by a flashlight beam, lay something that made no sense. Her backpack sat on the back seat. Inside it, 2 bottles of water, field notebooks, soil sample containers, a compact camera, a laminated trail map, a lightweight rain shell. On the center console was her cell phone, fully charged. For an experienced solo hiker, leaving without supplies wasn't just unusual, it was irrational. There were no signs of forced entry, no scuffed ground, no broken vegetation. It looked as though Elena had parked and simply walked away. At first light on October 4th, a full search and rescue operation was launched. Over 120 personnel were deployed: Forest Service rangers, county deputies, search and rescue volunteers, canine tracking units, aerial reconnaissance teams. Dogs picked up Elena's scent from the driver's door. They followed it 50 meters down the trail. Then it vanished, as if she had stepped into empty air. Teams searched rock ledges, ravines, creek beds, abandoned logging paths. Nothing. No clothing, no equipment, no blood, no trace. After 3 days, the search radius expanded. After 2 weeks, it narrowed again. By the end of October, the official effort was suspended. Elena Ward was declared missing, a case that refused to die. Months turned into years. Her bank accounts remained untouched. Her social security number was never used. No sightings were confirmed. Her parents refused to stop searching. They hired private investigators, printed flyers, returned to the forest year after year. Local hikers began whispering, "Another mountain ghost, another name swallowed by the woods." By 1998, the case was labeled cold. And then, almost 8 years after Elena disappeared, the forest gave something back, something no one was prepared to see. 8 years later, time erodes almost everything. Trails shift, trees fall, memories blur, but some places remain untouched, not because they're hidden, but because they feel wrong. On June 14, 2000, 3 people stepped into one of those places. They didn't know it yet. Caleb Norris, Evan Holt, and Maria Castillo were not thrill seekers. They were graduate students and hobby cavers with a shared obsession: forgotten geology. Their goal that Saturday was simple: locate and document potential limestone fissures near the remains of a 19th century mica mining site, abandoned long before the forest reclaimed it. The location was well outside tourist paths, roughly 6 kilometers east of Cragmore Loop, in a region marked on ranger maps with little more than contour lines and warning notes. Steep terrain, dense growth, limited visibility. The kind of place search teams avoided unless absolutely necessary. They parked their vehicle on an old logging road and proceeded on foot, following a shallow ravine choked with rhododendron and fallen trees. The air was damp and still, heavy with the smell of wet earth and decay. At 2:37 p.m., Maria stopped walking. "Do you see that?" she asked. The clearing. At first glance, it looked like a trick of the light. The ravine widened slightly, opening into a pocket of level ground. Unnatural in terrain this chaotic, the vegetation abruptly ended, as though something had deliberately cleared it away. In the center stood a structure, not a shelter, not a ruin, an arrangement. 4 thick logs, cut and stacked into a rectangular base. On top of them rested a slab of dark stone, unnaturally smooth, roughly 2 meters long. And on that stone, Caleb felt his stomach turn before his mind could fully process what he was seeing. A human figure lay there. The body was not decomposed. It was not skeletal. It was sealed. A translucent amber-brown substance coated the figure completely, forming a hardened shell that followed the curves of the body like a second skin. Light filtered through the forest canopy and refracted off its surface, giving it a dull golden glow. The figure appeared female. She lay on her back, hands folded neatly over her chest, head turned slightly toward the slope of the ravine. The substance had been applied unevenly, in thick layers, some cracked, some smooth, suggesting it had been built up slowly over time. This wasn't concealment, this was preservation. Caleb, the most experienced of the 3, reacted first. "No one touches anything," he said sharply. "Not a leaf." They stepped back. None of them needed to say the word crime. It was obvious. Using a zoom lens, Maria photographed the scene from multiple angles while Evan marked coordinates with a handheld GPS unit. Their hands shook as they worked. At the base of the stone slab, partially embedded in the soil, were 3 upright objects, candlesticks carved from bone. Each was hollowed, containing hardened wax residue. There were no personal belongings, no torn clothing, no footprints. The clearing was immaculate. Too immaculate. The return trip took over 3 hours. No one spoke. Every snapped twig sounded like footsteps. Every shadow felt watched. At 6:11 p.m., once they reached cell service, Caleb called emergency services and reported what they had found, providing exact coordinates and photographs. Within minutes, calls were being rerouted. By nightfall, the site was classified as restricted federal land. A joint task force mobilized immediately. Forest Service investigators, county homicide detectives, forensic specialists. They reached the perimeter just before sunset. Given the terrain and the complexity of the site, Detective Laura Bennett, lead investigator from the Watauga County Sheriff's Office, made a critical decision: no approach until morning. Floodlights and heavy movement risked destroying irreplaceable evidence. A security cordon was established 200 meters from the ravine entrance. Rangers stood watch through the night. The forest remained silent. At dawn on June 15th, the team descended. The photographs hadn't prepared them. Standing before it, the structure radiated intention. The logs had been cut with a handsaw. The stone slab bore no tool marks, likely hauled from elsewhere using brute force and leverage. This was not the work of chance. Forensic photographers documented everything. Wide shots of the ravine, close-ups of the resin layers, macro images of the bone candlesticks, soil patterns around the structure. Then someone noticed something else. Carved into the bark of nearby beech trees, subtle enough to miss at first, were symbols. A circle, a cross inside it. 7 of them, each at a different height, each facing inward. When the question of removal arose, the problem became immediately clear. The resin had bonded the body to the stone. Attempting separation would destroy both. The decision was unanimous. The entire structure would be extracted as one object. It weighed an estimated 320 kilograms. By late afternoon, rescue specialists began cutting a narrow access path through the dense undergrowth. Using a system of winches, cables, and pulleys, the slab was slowly raised from its wooden base. It took 9 hours. Every inch was deliberate, every movement documented. By the time the artifact reached the service road, night had fallen. A specialized transport vehicle waited. The forest swallowed the clearing once again. As the convoy pulled away toward the State Forensic Laboratory in Raleigh, one question hung in the air. This hadn't been done to hide a body. It had been done to honor it, or to claim it. And whoever was responsible had returned to this place again and again, season after season, without ever being seen. At 2:18 a.m., the transport vehicle rolled into the secured bay of the North Carolina State Forensic Center. Even among seasoned professionals, the object it carried produced an uneasy silence. It wasn't treated as a body. It was logged as an artifact. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Nathaniel Cross insisted on a controlled, unprecedented protocol. No one touched the resin until the team understood what they were dealing with. The structure was moved into a climate-stabilized examination room and allowed to acclimate for 12 hours. Only then did the real work begin, looking inside without breaking it. Traditional autopsy procedures were useless here. Instead, the first step was imaging. The slab and its occupant underwent full-spectrum X-ray scanning, high-resolution CT imaging, density mapping of the surrounding material. The results stunned the room. The skeleton was fully intact. No fractures to the limbs, no signs of blunt force trauma, no foreign metal objects. The resin formed dozens of distinct layers, each slightly different in density, like growth rings in a tree. This hadn't happened all at once. Someone had come back, again, and again, and again. Removing the resin required a solution that balanced chemistry, patience, and restraint. The outer layers were brittle, chipping away in flakes. The inner layers remained sticky, viscous, almost alive. Dr. Cross consulted polymer chemists, botanical resin specialists, museum conservation experts. Together, they designed a painstaking multi-stage removal process. The priority was the face. Identity came first, using dental tools and soft solvents applied by pipette. Forensic technicians worked millimeter by millimeter. Shifts ran around the clock. Every fragment was cataloged, every change documented. No one rushed. They couldn't afford to. By the evening of June 17th, the resin around the skull had thinned enough to reveal the jaw. Dental X-rays were taken immediately. Within an hour, the comparison came back. It was a perfect match. Elena Ward, 8 years after she vanished, she had been found, unchanged in ways that defied time. Bone samples were taken for DNA confirmation, but the team already knew. This wasn't discovery. This was confirmation. While technicians continued freeing the body, samples of the resin were sent to a palynology lab for pollen analysis. The results rewrote the case. Each layer contained microscopic traces of the environment from when it was applied. Late autumn pollen in the deepest layers, winter spores in the middle, spring and early summer pollen near the surface. The dates aligned. The first layer was applied in October 1992. The final layer, spring of 2000. For nearly 8 years, someone had returned to that ravine. Not randomly, ritually. Once the resin was fully removed, the body told its story. Soft tissues were desiccated but preserved. Oxygen and bacteria had been sealed out, creating a natural form of mummification. There was only one injury. A deep, narrow groove encircled the neck. Under magnification, forensic analysts found fibers embedded in the skin. Aged, processed leather. The hyoid bone was fractured. The conclusion was unavoidable. Elena Ward had been strangled. The weapon was likely a narrow leather belt. She had been killed elsewhere, or very near where she was found, then placed deliberately onto the stone slab. This wasn't panic. This was purpose. On June 22nd, authorities held a press conference. The public was informed that Elena Ward's remains had been identified and that her death was ruled a homicide. Details of the resin, the altar, and the ritual were withheld. not out of secrecy, but out of fear. Behind closed doors, the investigation changed shape. This was no longer about a missing student. This was about a killer who had operated in silence for nearly a decade, undetected, patient, and deeply rooted in the land. The profile. Behavioral analysts were brought in. Their conclusions were unsettling. The perpetrator was likely male, lived in or near the forest, possessed extensive wilderness survival skills, avoided modern tools, strong territorial attachment to the land. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was belief-driven, ideological, and whoever did this didn't see Elena as a victim. He saw her as an offering. As search teams re-examined the ravine, something else emerged. One of the tree symbols, older than the others, had partially healed over. This wasn't the first time the mark had been carved there. It had been renewed. The forest hadn't just witnessed the ritual. It had been marked as sacred ground. And somewhere nearby, someone had once lived long enough, and long enough ago, to make this place their own. With Elena Ward identified and the cause of death established, investigators were forced to confront a chilling reality. Whoever killed her had not vanished after the crime. He had stayed. He had returned again and again for nearly 8 years. That meant one thing. The killer knew the forest better than anyone searching for him. Detective Laura Bennett shifted the investigation away from conventional suspects. No classmates, no former partners, no random offenders. Instead, she asked a different question. Who lives where no one is looking? Lists were compiled. Illegal squatters, unregistered land occupants, long-term recluses, individuals cited for off-grid living near Pisgah National Forest. Rangers, retired park staff, hunters, and mail carriers were quietly interviewed. Most offered nothing useful, until one name, never recorded officially, kept surfacing in fragments. A retired ranger named Howard Ellis had patrolled the forest for nearly 3 decades. When shown photographs of the carved symbols, he went quiet. "I've seen those before," he said finally. He remembered a man. No name, no paperwork, no camp listed, just a presence. The encounters happened in the early 1990s, always deep off-trail. The man wore clothing stitched from animal hides and rough fabric. He never spoke. When confronted, he didn't run. He withdrew, melting back into the woods. Ellis said something else. The man carved symbols into trees, and he was territorial. Ellis believed the man lived near Bear Hollow Gorge, one of the most inaccessible regions of the forest. It was about 9 kilometers from the ravine where Elena had been found, easily walkable for someone accustomed to the terrain. A discreet expedition was authorized. No helicopters, no marked vehicles, no public record. After 2 days of searching, they found it. Half buried into a rock face, camouflaged with moss and fallen branches, was a structure that barely qualified as a building, a dugout. The roof had collapsed inward. The walls were made of uneven logs sealed with clay and pine pitch. Inside, time had stopped. A narrow cot, a stone hearth, hand-carved shelves, and carved into the interior wall, the same symbol, circle, cross, again, and again, and again. Physical proof. The search yielded more. Under the cot, a rusted handsaw, carving knives with antler handles. On a shelf, clay vessels containing hardened amber resin, bundles of dried herbs and roots. Outside, carved into surrounding pines, were sap collection grooves, old, deliberate, systematic. This wasn't survival. This was preparation. Samples were collected. Everything matched. The resin composition, the tool markings, the ritual symbols. But the man was gone, and had been for years. The vanishing hermit. The cabin showed no signs of recent habitation. Dust coated everything. Spider webs layered the doorway. Vegetation had crept inward, yet the final resin layer on Elena's body had been applied months earlier. The contradiction was terrifying. The killer had left his home, but not his ritual. Hair found on the cot yielded a complete DNA profile. It was uploaded to national databases. No matches, no criminal history, no military record, no driver's license. Whoever he was, he had lived outside the system. A ghost. The break came from an unexpected place. A county archivist reading a brief article about the investigation contacted Detective Bennett. He knew the land. Before Pisgah became protected forest, Bear Hollow had belonged to one family, one that violently resisted eviction. During the park's creation in the 1930s, they believed the land was sacred. One descendant, the archivist said, had never left. Records revealed a boy born in 1926. He vanished from census data in the 1950s. No marriage, no employment, no death certificate, only rumors that he went back to the forest, that he lived as a guardian, that he hated intruders. The boy now had a name and a motive. Investigators concluded Elena Ward didn't wander into danger. She crossed an invisible border. She entered land claimed by a man who believed civilization had stolen everything from him. Her death was not random. It was judgment, and the ritual that followed wasn't about hiding her body. It was about binding her to the land forever and ending without justice. The killer was never found. The evidence suggests he died alone, somewhere deep in the forest he loved. His body, like so many others, was claimed by the wilderness. In 2002, the case was closed, solved, but never truly resolved. When the case file was officially stamped closed, there was no courtroom, no handcuffs, no verdict read aloud, no punishment measured in years, only paperwork. The name of the suspected killer was written into the margins of the report, followed by a phrase rarely used in homicide investigations: presumed deceased. For the law, it was enough. For Elena Ward's family, it never would be. A body returned, a question unanswered. Elena was laid to rest in Boone on a quiet October afternoon, almost exactly 8 years after she disappeared. The casket was closed. Her parents stood beside it, knowing something few families ever have to face. They had answers, but no justice. No one could say when she realized she was in danger. No one could say if she tried to run. No one could say what she thought as the forest closed around her. The mountains, as they always had, kept their silence. The stone slab was never returned to the ravine. It now sits in a secured federal storage facility, sealed, cataloged, and rarely accessed. The bone candlesticks were destroyed. The resin samples archived. The clearing itself was left untouched. Over time, vegetation crept back in. Leaves fell. Roots cracked the soil. The symbols carved into the trees slowly healed, scar tissue swallowed by bark. To an untrained eye, the place no longer exists. But rangers avoid it. They always have. A pattern older than the case. In the years following the investigation, Detective Laura Bennett quietly reviewed other cases. Disappearances, unexplained deaths, lost hikers who were never found. She noticed something unsettling. The geography overlapped. Remote boundaries, former settlements, land taken and renamed, places where human memory ended, but resentment didn't. No evidence connected them, no proof, just a pattern that felt familiar. The man believed to be responsible was never found. Search teams never located his remains, but investigators believe they know what happened. Old, ill, alone. He likely died where he lived, deep in the forest he believed belonged to him. No marker, no ritual, no preservation. The wilderness he worshipped gave him no monument, only disappearance. Locals still tell the story. They talk about a student who never came home, a body sealed in amber, a man who refused to leave. Some dismiss it as folklore, others don't. Every year, hikers report feeling watched near the edges of marked trails. Some say their compasses spin, others swear they've seen symbols half-healed in bark. Rangers chalk it up to imagination, but they still warn visitors. Stay on the trail, respect the land, and if something feels wrong, leave. This is not just a story about murder. It's a story about ownership, about identity, about what happens when belief outlives reason, about a man who turned grief into mythology, and a young woman who became part of it. Civilization drew lines on a map. He refused to accept them, and the forest became the only witness that never spoke. Some places don't forget. They don't forgive. They wait. And sometimes they answer trespass not with violence, but with silence.